This is good news. It's a notification that an illegal Airbnb that I was working to get closed has been closed. This is something I've done a few times over the last few years, mostly in the Liberties, mainly aimed at getting illegal Airbnbs converted back to normal homes for rent or sale. But I have to be honest and say that this work is a drop in the ocean. This is a longer video than normal. It's more for those who are interested in a bit more detail. But if you want to see why I think Airbnbs have been so difficult to budge, particularly in Dublin, here are some of the things I've learned as a Dublin City Councillor. So we know that in Dublin City alone there are thousands of illegal Airbnbs operating. Legally they're often called short-term lets. I say Airbnb, but that's just one of the companies. There's others like Booking.com or VRBO. But if you want to let out a room in your house, you can generally do that without planning permission. If you want to let out the whole house, the whole apartment for less than 90 days, you can also do that without planning permission. But the law says that if you want to do more than 90 days for your whole home, you need to get planning permission, essentially changing the use of it from a home to a short-term let. And in Dublin City Council, the way we've got the development plan set up means it's very, very unlikely that you will get that permission if you apply. So in theory, that should be it. But the law, which was passed in 2019, it doesn't really work. It's not effective, despite a lot of effort. Why is that? Well, first of all, it can be hard to spot what is actually a short-term let. It's difficult to identify how many days exactly it's been rented out for. And in the case of apartments, you often can't tell the apartment number from just looking at the booking page. Like, for example, I used to live in this apartment block when I was first elected as a councillor. By my count, there were about 8 Airbnbs in the development, but I couldn't, even though I lived there, I couldn't spot which one they were from the ads. So it was equally hard for the council to do that. The second reason why it's hard to enforce Airbnbs is that it's all done through the planning process, and planning in Ireland is quite a slow, legalistic, kind of complicated system, and it's geared more towards enforcement on physical buildings. So if someone physically builds something illegally, like an extension or something like that, it's quite easy for planning enforcement to spot that and take enforcement action. But if it's something like this, where it's kind of like there's a different use than intended and it has to be for a certain period, and it's much harder to do. And the third issue is incentive. Now, you can make a lot of money from Airbnb, and even if you're caught, which many people aren't, you'll basically just be directed to stop. And the risks of substantial prosecution or fines is pretty low, so a lot of people just take the risk. Now, from council figures and my own experience, the vast majority of illegal Airbnb landlords do seem to stop once they get like a formal warning, but not all do, and many anyway, certainly never even get to that stage. So all that said, the law is aiming to resolve the issue, but it's not a very effective law. It's poorly designed. What should the law actually be? Well, there was an attempt in 2022 to overhaul all of this by the Green Party's Catherine Martin, who was then the tourism minister. That was in the last government. Now, her idea was much better, and basically it was to make it illegal for a platform like Airbnb or Booking.com to have a property in Ireland online if that property wasn't already registered with Fáilte Ireland, the tourist board. And if you wanted to get that registration with Fáilte Ireland and to rent it out for more than 90 days, you would need planning permission. So basically it was switching up the system so that instead of inspecting for people breaking the law after the fact and trying to enforce it, then you make it so that you couldn't even list on the website without getting permission first. It's a much smarter, much cheaper and more effective way to do it. Now, this proposal unfortunately was shot down by the European Commission. There were a couple of reasons for that, but the big one was because they were developing their own EU-wide plans to combat this issue across Europe. Now, the good news is that we do now have a government bill that will largely do what Catherine Martin intended. It's called the Short-Term Letting and Tourism Bill 2025. Hopefully, it'll come into force next year. The devil, of course, will be in the detail of implementation, but it looks broadly promising if weirdly delayed. So that could be good. But one of the things that I think will need more work is also to look at where these short-term lets actually do get planning permission. Like in Dublin City, the overriding issue is obviously the housing crisis. We already have a fair bit of tourism, so we've been very strict on them, and virtually any application for short-term lets have been rejected by the council. But I'm conscious that, like, I'm in Dublin City, that's different from other parts of the country. There might be parts of the country where they really need to grow the non-hotel tourist industry. Perhaps that's needed for jobs or to support new businesses. And in those areas of the country, I think councillors, planners could apply a bit more flexibility to short-term lets. There's a former Fine Gael TD for Galway, Kieran Cannon, who I have a lot of respect for. He spoke to an Oireachtas committee really well about this, that you do need to regulate Airbnbs more, but there's a bit of balance needed, particularly in rural areas where there's kind of an economic dependence on them. Ultimately, this is going to be up to councillors and councils on that front, and that's a good thing, because no one policy should just be applied across the whole country in a blanket way, pretending as if Connemara is the same as O'Connell Street. Now, if it works, this should be really, really positive. It should bring back thousands of homes, particularly in cities, back to the property market for purchase and rent, which will help ease the housing crisis. But I have to be honest, this is not going to end the housing crisis. No single policy will, and if you're not building lots of new homes, apartments and houses, you're not going to be able to get the job done.